So this session has got a thought-provoking title, The Rise and Fall of Professional NGOs. At least one person has told me it's a provocative title. It reminds him of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Be that as it may, I'm happy to welcome an old friend and colleague, Depinder Kapur, with whom I have worked. I'm Rajesh Ramakrishnan. I'm from PRM 10, and Depinder is from PRM 8. We worked together at the Society for Promotion of Wastelands Development in the early to late 90s. And thereafter, we have parted ways and worked in various other organizations. So today's session is primarily about the professional NGOs which sprang up from the mid-80s, and they're still around, but arguably some may say they have seen their heyday. But before we move on to what Depinder has to say, and today we plan to make this a much more interactive session than usual. It is not meant to be just one person lecturing. So let's try to make it like that. So let me start with a few words on the current situation of NGOs. So where we find ourselves in the NGO sector is that international funding is now very low, and corporates and high net worth individuals who are funding NGOs, they have a very limited and conservative preferences, which they would like to see supported. Throughout the NGO sector, there have been massive job losses. Many NGOs are wound up. And overall, the space for civil society has shrunk. In place of numerous small, diverse, and local organizations, the preference now is for large, standardized, and centralized organizations. There is a paucity of reliable data about the sector, so it's very difficult to say anything very definitively. But there is also a perception very contrary to the times when we worked, Depinder and I worked in places like SPWD. The perception now is that NGOs are very poorly governed, and the perceptions range from inefficiency to outright fraud. Today, the government accounts for about 95% of social sector expenditure. A small proportion is channelized through NGOs, but the budgets which go to NGOs are shoestring. They do not cover costs, payments are delayed, and NGOs have to suffer very whimsical decision-making by government functionaries. Foreign funding under the FCRA was 23,000 crore rupees in 2023. And you can compare that with the figure of foreign direct investment, which was 6,95,000 crores. Figures of funding trends are not reliable, but foreign funding to NGOs has increased at a rate less than the inflation rate. So it's stagnation, or it's actually going down. Between 2014 and 2023, over 16,000 NGOs have had their FCRA licenses cancelled or not renewed. And that includes big names like Center for Policy Research, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, Oxfam, Save the Children, Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment, and the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. In fact, a CBI investigation was initiated against the Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment's founder, Ritvik Datta, for, in quotes, criticizing government policy and agitating farmers against industrialists and industrial policy of the government. International donors now need prior preference from the Ministry of Home Affairs before every financial transaction. Funds from international faith-based donors have dried up totally. There is now virtually no international funding for human rights, democratic freedoms, and policy advocacy. International funding is now possible only for working directly with the government, providing services, and for work that is deemed by the government as non-political and non-controversial. The growth of CSR funding is widely celebrated now. It reached about 28,000 crore rupees in 2023. It is the only lifeline for NGOs which have no access to international funding or philanthropic funding. But half of CSR funds go to companies' own foundations. And CSR funds typically go to NGOs for short-term, easily measurable, direct service delivery. And they give rise to a culture of very time-consuming measurement and reporting. It is not a real partnership with corporates dominating NGOs. CSR funding is typically risk-averse, It avoids long-term outcomes, uncertain outcomes, and causes which are considered to be controversial. And a whole new ecosystem of intermediary organizations have sprung up around CSR. A lot of organizations which promise you linkages with companies, which help you to set up those linkages. So NGOs whose work is rights-based and for systemic change, who work in remote geographies and with the most marginalized communities, are left out. What is also celebrated today is the philanthropy of high net worth individuals, estimated at rupees 26,000 crores in 2023. Their portfolio has diversified from education and livelihoods primarily now to health and climate change as well. But solutions again tend to be technocratic. Caste and gender discrimination, community-driven approaches, and anything that sounds remotely political are strictly avoided. There are new and emerging options which are talked about with great hope: impact investing, development impact bonds, and social stock exchange. These are very nascent yet and are good for NGOs that can demonstrate impacts using hard metrics within a short time frame. For most NGOs, therefore, the only route left is retail fundraising, low value, high volume contributions from individuals of all socioeconomic backgrounds. The estimate of this in 2022-23 was between 27,000 and 37,000 crores. Therefore, for most NGOs, the pathways available now are either public service delivery with government funding, no rights-based approaches, no politics, or you find that rare and progressive high net worth individual donor, or you build your own public constituency for crowdfunding. So this is the situation that the sector finds itself in now. And what we are going to do today is to turn the clock back to the mid to late 1980s and 90s and 2000s. That was the heyday of what we call the professional NGOs when they first made their appearance. And Depinder is primarily going to talk about that. Depinder has worked with SPWD, Society for Promotion of Wastelands Development, with Care India, with WaterAid India, with Oxfam, with Swachh Bharat Mission, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, Shiv Nadar University, and now he's with the Center for Science and Environment's water team. So he has worked with international NGOs, national NGOs, as well as with government. So it's over to Depinder. Depinder, can you give us a trailer of what you will speak on today?
Thanks, Rajesh, and thanks for the long introduction, personal introduction, but also thanks for the sector introduction, which you gave very well. And the idea of this webinar or this session was more to share an experience and to discuss and to put on the plate in front of everyone what we have been through. So it's in some ways an experiential discussion. And so what I would do is to share what I had prepared in a form of a note about 2 years back, where I had tried to analyze my personal experience of working in NGOs in a larger context of understanding how the NGO sector itself has evolved in India in the last 3.5 decades since I've been working, and also to understand what the leadership of NGOs means. So these two things, as you asked, I have tried to discuss how the evolution of NGOs happened and in context of the changes in the political economy and of the country, and how do we understand the changes happening today as a result of that. And also a discussion or a reflection on understanding leadership, because if one does it in a very personalized manner, it can be very good anecdotal experience sharing of different, experiences. But I think that can be done at another level. But for a larger discussion, it is very important, given the crisis, as you have rightly shown in the professional NGO sector, to present and discuss its evolution. This is not to pass a judgment on anyone or any organization or individual, nor is it meant to classify NGOs into professional or non-professional. Some people also, when I shared it earlier, they got confused that am I making a comment on say, the Gandhian NGOs or the charity work. No, clearly the distinction is being made for organizations which evolved in a professional charter of work. And that happened, interestingly, in the mid-80s or the early 80s. So,
Okay.
so for example, when I joined AKRSP, which was my first job after IRMA in 1988, and then SPWD in 1989, in Delhi, there were just 4 professional NGOs, all registered simultaneously in early 80s. SPWD, CSE, PRIA, Development Alternatives. AKRSP was also registered around that time, mid-80s. So it was interesting going back in time to just to understand and ask the question to ourselves, why professional NGOs emerged in the early 80s or the late 70s and not before that. So this is, I think, important as a starting point.
Yes, I was actually coming to that because I went through the paper which you had sent me some months back. And it was interesting that you saw connections between economic liberalization and the professional NGOs that emerged from the mid-80s onwards. So can you take us through those connections that you saw between economic liberalization and NGOs?
So, and this is again, it's a shared understanding with you, with Rajesh and other people. So I don't claim any credit for a unique understanding, but yes, I think it has not been done. And therefore, it is important to discuss and put on the table that the decades after independence, 50s, 60s, were the decade of economic development which India went through at a rapid pace, but which was in the form of a state-led capitalist growth. We had big industry, we had major institutional setup, irrigation industry, core industry, everything was going on in the post-independence period at a rapid pace. And by the 70s, this momentum of economic development had somehow slowed down or come under strain. Not just the momentum of economic development, but also the promise of jobs and employment and development, which was offered at that time, had come under strain. And around that time, there was a lot of political movements happening in the 70s, post-emergency, and a lot of turmoil was happening. And as that period transitioned towards the 80s, I believe that India transitioned from that state-led capitalist development to a neoliberal free market development, which was formally announced in 1991 when we announced the new economic policy, but the background for which was laid in the mid-80s. And this economic change at the national level, combined also with an environmental consciousness in the West. So the transition at the national level provided a space for not just private capital to enter as FDI from abroad, but also for NGOs, which were essentially entrepreneur, private-led at that time, to also come up and try and test the waters at that stage, to also present an alternative of what was then missing in the state-led capitalist development. And that niche time of transition was very important in terms of understanding why the NGOs, these professional NGOs, which were registered as societies, which had professionals from MBAs to engineers, doctors, and educationists joining in such large number, that perhaps explains that period of 1980s, explains why the professional NGOs emerged at that time.
So what do you see as the contribution of the professional NGOs as a group what were their strengths and weaknesses as you see them now in prospect?
So the NGOs all brought with them, the professional NGOs, I am again emphasizing, brought with them not just a professional approach to addressing issues of poverty and development, they also filled in the gap which was there at that time in the state-led capitalist development of large-scale public sector development, public works. So the NGOs brought a more nuanced understanding of why things were not happening on the ground, and small-scale interventions were required to make a dent or improvement in the livelihoods, in the welfare, in the development of India. So I think the thought leadership and the knowledge leadership and the small-scale interventions. If you remember Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, and there was also this great emphasis on from large irrigation projects to small-scale watershed development, from understanding education and health from the perspective of people rather than through prescribed pedagogies, microcredit, all these emerged because a kind of a private initiative came into the development sector.
Yeah, I agree. I forgot to mention that you started with AKRSP. So you saw this transition from the field in AKRSP where you were primarily based when you moved to Delhi, where you were working for what was then called the National NGO, which was funding various other grassroots groups. So primarily it looked like the connect with the field, the connect with constituencies, the ability to see things from the perspective of small farmers, of forest dwellers, which was simply absent in policy. That is something that the professional NGOs brought in. They were able to not only have that experience, but also to articulate it, to analyze it, and present it to policymakers. Would you like to maybe cite some examples of that?
So, for example, watershed development, if you take, the big dams, for example, are designed on the basis of how much water will actually enter that dam. And so the structure of the dam, the height, the strength of the dam should be able to hold a big volume of water. And then, of course, you need to develop feeder channels and irrigation. So the NGOs applied the same logic. And I remember in SPWD, we used to apply that logic that in a micro watershed, say in Rajasthan or desert or semi-arid areas, how much is the volume, how much is the average per day maximum rainfall episode? Would be about 50 millimeters of rain. So you need to design your structures, your micro watershed structures in a way that they are able to withstand 50 mm rainfall. If you design it above that in terms of the earthwork and the construction, then it's a waste of money. If you design it under it, then it leads to destruction of the investment or the infrastructure if the rain is high. So these kind of minute understandings combined with a lot of work which was done globally at that time by various agencies, international development agencies. Rio Summit had happened in the early 90s. Environment was pushed also as an agenda where you could work professionally. So both the external and the internal enabling environment of the transition of the Indian economy and the rise of and the opportunity of NGOs to work in this field. NGOs were not seen as breaking India, as has become the norm currently. They were seen as the beacons of hope that they will offer solutions at that time. So besides this example, I think if you look at the microcredit also, the big banks were not lending money So microcredit seemed like a good opportunity, how to lend to the people who are not lendable by the banking system. And I think the biggest strides happened in the education and health sectors in terms of understanding. I think that David Werner's book, uh, of why people don't access healthcare. Uh, so how the other half dies, Susan George. So all those things came in at a time where a big statist push at the national level of big projects was either not delivering. And also, if you remember, N.S. Jodha came up with that famous analysis in EPW that the common lands are the last resort for the poor. And land is privatized, water is privatized. So if we develop common lands as for pasture lands or for trees, it's the poor by default who would benefit. So these factors at that time played an enabling role for professional NGOs like ours in the development sector to come up, offer solutions, offer alternatives.
Yeah, that's about strengths. And what are the weaknesses which we saw even in those days and which we realize perhaps even more now? One thing comes to my mind, that it was in the 90s that this whole concept of joint forest management came up. For the first time, the forest department, which was otherwise completely controlling forestry, opened up in response to interventions, in response to experiments on the ground. And that resulted in what was then called as joint forest management, where the communities on the ground and the local forest department, they work hand in hand to conserve forests. Now, that was then considered to be a very, very revolutionary move. But we know that thereafter, it did not actually move forward in the sense of handing over management to communities. And critics often say that forest departments learned to play the game. They learned the language that donors wanted them to speak. And they often spoke about management, about joint management, but then it didn't really work out. I see that Manu has raised his hand. I think let's have this conversation going for a little bit of time, and then I'll open up the floor. Yeah. Now, as we fast forward to 2004, that election and thereafter, all the groundbreaking legislation that came up, whether it was the right to work, which came up in the form of MGNREGS, or the Forest Rights Act, or the Right to Education Act, all of this arguably came from the work, not so much of the professional NGOs. I'm not saying that there was no contribution there, but from the so-called activist groups, Mazdoor Kisan, Shakti Sangathan in Rajasthan, leading to the Right to Information Act and contributing to MGNREGS. Then the Campaign for Survival and Dignity and Kashtakari Sangatna, various other activist groups which organized forest dwellers, and that led to the Forest Rights Act. So looking at that, it looked like the work of professional NGOs, though it opened up new vistas, it was a new way for communities to engage with the state. It was still quite depoliticized. And that in the 2000s, after 2004, that became very apparent. Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, even before that, Rajesh, for example, NGOs were allowed, for example, the National Watershed Mission pushed for per hectare 4,000 rupees for watershed development. But the idea was that we take the money, we invest, we develop, and we leave. And therefore, any investment needs subsequent investments as well. And that never happened because it somehow was assumed that the community will take over, the grass would grow on its own, the trees would grow on its own. And we know that even like I work in urban sanitation now, a heavy investment requires operations and maintenance. That was never possible also, I think, in that system. And we were also young at that time. We also did not understand that. We felt that, yes, once the car is pushed, it'll run on its own. And that was a big mistake, I think, at that time. And we soon realized it wasn't happening. And that is the time when the fatigue also set in, and people realize that, employment guarantee is required rather than just projects. So small projects here and there were also not failing, I would say, after a certain amount of a certain time. And at the same time, the big international NGOs were, for example, I worked in a couple of them. They were also going overboard to either run after money. Disaster response and rehabilitation became a major avenue for NGO work at that time. And these core issues, like you were saying, starting from JFM and why things don't work, these were then pushed on the back burner. And the whole effort was that let's try to offer something rather than, again, questioning why it is not happening, trying to bring in some legislation certainly helped. And you're right, at that stage, in my note also, therefore, when I was thinking about the leadership and the role of leadership, it is not just the leadership at the NGO level, but also who were outside the NGOs, I think, played a major role. P. Sainath, and all the other agents, journalists, filmmakers, activists, people who joined from academia. So at various level, people were pushing the envelope of development, trying to make sense out of it. The euphoria that earlier NGOs had was then also, either going down or taken up by these other agents and individuals. And I think that should also be recognized. It's not just that the NGOs were there. So yes, I think we can open up the discussion and take up a few questions and then take it forward.
Yeah, sure. Manu, you had some questions.
Hi. Yes, thank you, Rajesh. First of all, good to see you finally, Rajesh, and looking forward to that. Nice to see you, Depinder. I would like to really thank you for that wonderful note that you wrote. I think for somebody who's not worked in the development sector, it gives a very wonderful perspective of the last 30 years of how the whole sector has evolved and now what has happened to it. And it kind of just fits in all the dots that you didn't know how they fit. So thank you for that note, and I think it really is also a synopsis of your career. And I think it really deserves to lead further into a book, and probably that is something we should talk about. I'm really nice if everyone could switch on the cameras. It'd be good to see your faces. I only see Rajesh and Depinder. It's a small group. Why not just know and see each other? So my question, this whole thing, while I think I know what is the reason politically, but how come the funding stopped and the professional NGOs, the era finished? Is it because of politics and governance and government policies, or is something more to it? We just wanted to understand, and what can be done? The second part is what can be done to revive such professional NGOs.
So Rajesh, would you like to respond?
No, it's too difficult for me. Why don't you start? I mean, it doesn't mean that only Depinder and I have to respond. Others can also come up with responses. Let's make this an open-ended discussion. We don't want to come to any definitive conclusions in half an hour or 1 hour today. So let's keep it rolling.
I see Mr. Cherin also raising his hand. So
yes, that question is on the table. So yeah, Matthew Cherin, perhaps you could partly answer this, or I don't know if you have any other question. Please go ahead.
No, I thank you, Depinder, for that wonderful talk and answering some of the problems. of the sector. But what I want to state is last year, a group of NGOs brought out a report on the non-profit sector. And our report did say three things. One, it said that we contribute about 2% of the GDP. We employ about 18 million workers, and we have 9 million volunteers, which is bigger than the RSS. Actually, this point is deliberate because we have more Swayamsevaks than the RSS. Then, apart from that, we have been able to reach the aspirational districts, and most NGOs work in the last mile doing developmental work. At the same time, the funds in the sector, barring the FCRA funded, which is only about 20,000 non-profits, the funds in the other sector is growing. That is the good news. The bad news is that we are over-regulated. We have more regulation than the corporate sector. And we have a non-transparent ministry doing it, that those of you who work in the sector, if you ask any question, send an email, you will get no reply. And of course, when I mean we as a group are trying to correct this so that there can be a political pushback. And of course, I don't want to take cudgels against those who are professional NGOs or those who are not professional NGOs, though I am from IRMA. I think a lot of the people who work in the non-profit sector are professionals, be they from a graduate degree or a simple degree, etc. Because for me, the professional is somebody who delivers on time and does it with quality. If they do it, then they're a professional. So I would say the bulk of the sector is professional. There could be a few people who are black sheep. So currently, the volume of the money which is transacted by the sector is close to 365 billion. That is the statistic. And this has been done by economic trick surveys, etc. And we have come to this figure. So what I want to tell you is that as a sector, we need to push back. We need not be worried on the government's thing because it has to be a political pushback. It cannot be a non-political pushback because we have contributed to the ASHA worker. We have brought in the forest laws. We have brought in the right to information. We brought in the right to education, the right to food, various things. And in my own field in aging, we brought the national policy for aging onto the table. So there are many contributions by the NGOs. So we should not be belittled and we need to push back. That is my point. And thank you, Depinder, for bringing it to the front. And I'm still reading your paper. I've not completed it. And I will send you feedback personally on the email or WhatsApp to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. I would love to see the paper that you're talking about. If you could upload it on the chat here, or maybe we can see it later, it would be very nice. Manu, the question that you asked, my feeling is still that yes, the state has stepped in a big way. It has over-regulated. But my question is, were there weaknesses in the whole professional NGO setup in its heyday itself, which gave rise to this? Were we politically innocent in some way in the way we were conducting our work, that we did not know what were the forces that are ranged against us and which would eventually try to push us back? Is that lack of understanding of political economy, is that what brought this about? Any thoughts on that, Depinder?
Yeah, I mean, if you just, what Matthew is referring to is the larger voluntary sector. And we are not here to make a distinction between that and the professional. We are only saying that we are talking about a sector which was funded, which was relying on funds, and which was dependent on either external funds or from big philanthropists. when we are saying professional, we are not saying others are not professional. We are saying that we are talking about funded professional work as compared to other work in which we see there is a decline, a marked decline, both in funding and in operations. Oxfam has closed down. Save the Children has closed down. CARE has closed down. I mean, these were some of the largest professional NGOs. So we are not making a comment on all professional NGO work in India. We are only saying that this decline in funding from DFID, from Scandinavian countries, started in the end of 1990s after the Pokhran blast. And that is a fact. And while CSR funding may have increased, while more people may be on the ground, while our total funding and volunteers may be more, but where is it coming from? I think that also needs to be understood today. If CSRs have become a major employers of development work, if the big four agencies, KPMG, EY and others are also employing a large number of people, we need to recognize this change. It will be a little naive for us to say that, no, it is growing and, we are large numbers, but the character has changed significantly. And with that, the focus of the NGO work has become service delivery. And more people are in service delivery, which is, we're not saying it shouldn't be, but the fact is that that character and the mandate with which Rajesh was saying when it was set up was not that. The setup was that we are small, we are nimble, we'll be able to offer solutions, we will be able to offer ideas, and we will also be an independent, credible voice, which will critique as well. Now, that has gone down dramatically. And as Matthew was saying, with all the regulations and the restrictions, the FCRA and others, the professionally funded NGOs are the ones which we are talking here, which have faced a decline. And that needs to be, that perhaps, Manu, is why you're saying, why did it happen? So I think it happened because the transition period in the 80s and the 90s, which opened space for NGOs to criticize, to work, to demonstrate, to do a lot of pioneering research and development, to also work, as Matthew is saying, on the acts, Manrega and Right to Information and other acts, which Rajesh has pointed out actually came from outside the professional NGO field. It came from activists. That space has shrunk. As India embraces neoliberalism in its more advanced form, the space for criticism itself has shrunk. The space for alternatives have shrunk. You work with us, you deliver, don't question. And we have seen that happening, the kind of repression which happens in the tribal areas, in mining areas, that was not there before. And NGOs have been kicked out of these areas who were there. So this fact is there. It needs to be recognized that a certain kind of NGO voluntary work is now under a lot of pressure, whereas a CSR kind of work, I've also been told by my friends in Gujarat that the CSRs are subcontracting DRDA work, that the big CSRs have taken on districts, in fact, and they're trying to replace the government they take it on contract. How many watersheds do you want to do? We will do it for you. You pay us this. So the character is also significantly changing. Whereas earlier it was supposed to be independent watchdogs, independent credible voice. It is becoming more and more the arms of delivery. And to that extent, the criticism naturally cannot come if you become the arms of delivery.
I think I'd like to also add on to it, Depinder. What I understand from professional NGOs is where, say, development professionals who earn a livelihood by working in the development sector can find employment in. I think that, like, if say we are from IRMA development professionals, then the organizations where we could work as NGO, those, whereas in the sense development work in India has not reduced or whatever has not happened. A lot of activities, not professional development work in the sense that doesn't provide.
Manu, your voice
livelihood to
is,
professionals.
yeah, Manu, you're freezing up now and then. I think there's some
Okay,
problem with your net.
Okay, do I repeat that? I think the difference is that professional NGOs, what you want to say, it is not as if that other NGOs are not professional. It is just that where professionals could find employment. I think that is probably what you're trying to say. Am I audible?
Yeah, it's breaking,
Yeah.
but we can make sense
Hello?
of your argument. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So in sense, when you say professional NGOs, people take offense that कि बाकी NGOs professional नहीं है. तो वैसी बात नहीं है. बात ये है कि भाई जहाँ professional को नौकरी मिल जाए, हम उनकी बात कर रहे हैं. वैसे NGOs अब कम हो गई हैं, बंद हो रही हैं. लोग अपने reduce कर रहे हैं. I think that is what you're trying to say.
We were also
Yeah.
trying to, Rajesh had raised that point also, that were we also a little naive in the 80s and 90s? I think that is also an important point. For example, within some of the pitfalls I was noting down about NGO work was that there was a certain romanticization of the Indian rural reality also. That somehow we will go with this and, we will somehow suddenly bring change. And that naivety hit us when that change did not happen, either because it was not sustained by government initiatives or by the private sector or by the donors, or also for the fact that Indian society was caste and class divided, which we were not prepared to understand at that point. And this point to which Manu, you're referring to, professional versus non-professional, well, let us also admit, whether it is ASHA workers or others, they are also professional they are also paid professionals, and their demands for payment have been long, and they've been on strike, and and the ability of the so-called professional NGO sector to stand up with them has been very poor. So while yes, we have enabled a large proliferation of voluntary workers as well as people who are paid voluntary workers, but the fact is that a change will happen either if it is sustained or it has some backing from the government, which is not there. So only that naivety and that limitation of NGO work we were trying to highlight here. We are not critical of anyone. All we are saying is, let's not also glorify the NGO sector work into that we've done so much and we've grown so much, whereas the fact is that it is struggling, and ASHA workers are struggling for their employment and their wages, and that fact should always be reminding us. And therefore, as professionals, we with our education, better endowed education, what should be our understanding of the NGO sector is very important.
See, what I understood from this term professional is the way the whole ecosystem shaped up was donors and NGOs who carry out operations. How do you professionalize in such a way that efficiency improves? How do you projectize in a way that you get a bigger bang for the bucks? You deliver better. So you come up with complicated log frames, you have targets, and you have activities, you have theories of change, and the whole thing becomes more and more around the paperwork associated with that of measurement of change, so on. And as it progressed, more and more, there was disconnection with reality. There was disconnection with the political content. There was a lot of rights talk, but not actual mobilization, not actual Sangathan building at grassroots level, which is what will politically stand the test of time. So in a way, it was a big structure standing on very weak foundations. And that professionalism of a certain kind is under challenge. but I think it is still standing very much in whatever work is happening under CSR and so on. That kind of professionalism still survives, and deliberately. It is meant to be more and more depoliticized. It is meant to be more and more delivery with efficiency at lowest cost.
Also,
Vijay Bhaskar. Okay, go on, Depinder. After that, we'll take a question from Vijay Bhaskar.
no, let's take from Vijay.
Okay, go ahead. Vijay Bhaskar Srinivas, if you could briefly introduce yourself and then your question.
Yeah, I'm from PRM 16. My question is about crafting institutions, which Eleanor Ostrom has rightly pointed out. So for us to take advantage of any of these newer inventions, newer technologies, there will have to be some body or some mechanism where the newer institutions are created and stabilized. Without that, as she clearly demonstrated, irrigation without newer institutions is not going to yield the required results. If these professional NGOs are disappearing, what will be the future of all this new technology that is getting in? Because unless and until there are new institutions to absorb these new technologies into the social life, for example, say AI, right? Or even when we are looking at the newer age interventions like say internet, for example, right? There are reports that internet is being used for, at least by the youth, more for the poor rather than for education. Right? So unless and until we take care of those institutions or develop appropriate institutions, so in the given current reality, what does the panel think about who is going to take up that space? Thank you.
Srinivas, you are equally welcome to answer the question if you have answers.
No, I don't have. I'm asking the panel for further enlightenment.
I have nothing enlightening to say, except that Eleanor Ostrom and institutions, this was much discussed during the 90s and 2000s. And there was some amount of criticism also of that. But that has paled into insignificance in the face of what we are seeing now. Now it is all about Labharti. My Baap Sarkar will give something and Labharti will come and take with gratitude with folded hands. No question of institutions. Institutions, you know what kind of institutions are required at the grassroots. Who will create those? No other institutions. That is the unsaid or the subtext which is going on today. But you are absolutely right that if we want our forests to survive, if we want our rivers to survive, then you need to have nested institutions of people which are nested with larger state structures, which actually means a transformation in the kind of state itself and in the kind of economy. It cannot be based on this GDP based growth at any cost kind of economy. These are much larger questions, but that is the push towards which we are taking. It's not going to survive. We need these institutions. Take something like the Forest Rights Act itself. If you want actual community-based forest management, then that right under Section 31I of the Forest Rights Act of the community itself managing its own forest resource, that needs to be given. But the ministry in its data does not even give out how many such applications came in and how many such applications have been awarded that right. They completely mask it because they do not want to give up that control. That's as much as I can say about the institutional question.
And I think Eleanor Ostrom played a critical role in defending the role and relevance of community action versus state action, or against people who were saying that, tragedy of commons, nothing is possible. So her whole fight was that no, people can manage and they should be allowed to manage. But that did not move further. And what we witnessed since 2000s, Bhaskar, was that it was more market-led growth. So whether it is market-led agriculture, FPOs coming up, everything, the logic completely turned towards the market as a solution provider, not communities. And communities are expected to fit into the system. FPOs we were talking of should have enabling laws and legal systems within which, farmers can stake their claim. And we saw, all of us from IRMA came from the dairy movement, where, one member, one vote worked in the dairy sector, but could not be replicated in other sectors. So in one of my analysis, I had also, when we were in SPWD, Rajesh and others, we used to also question, why dairy cooperatives succeeded in the dairy sector and not in other sectors. And, these were the questions which led us to understand, for example, the milk sector is very critical for the urban development. And India was urbanizing in the 70s, 80s, 90s. If there is a milk crisis, it'll impact the governance and the executive. So yes, in one sector, we saw successful cooperatives working, and with a lot of state support, even though we said that it was Operation Flood, which brought in money and transformed it into milk unions and infrastructure. But the fact was that the state was behind it. That's why it happened. Now the state is against it, and we see a dismantling of the cooperative sector happening right in front of our eyes. NDDB has set up a mission to promote private cooperatives or to promote private dairy farms. So all this falls when we face the political economy of our times. So we tried to understand the evolution of NGOs in the 80s and the transition from state capitalism to neoliberalism. And as the neoliberalism deepens, we see a crisis in the NGOs and the voluntary sector at large, which should not be ignored. So that was what was driving us to analyze our experience, not from an anecdotal experience of, that very nice experiences we've all had. And we are all very grateful for the opportunity that we were part of it. But today, when young IRMANs, and Ritu was telling me she was counseling IRMANs who were calling her, before this meeting, it's very difficult to, therefore, explain or motivate younger people that if you join this NGO sector professional today, what kind of work you will actually get to do. So when Rajesh and I were there in SPWD, we had 1 year as a probation to read a book, write about it, and present a review and work under a mentor to understand how small NGOs and watershed work in the country is happening. Now, where do you get this experience? Who is going to mentor somebody who joins EY or KPMG and is, put on a job in a PMU in the government to support the mission, or is, given a task in a 1 year contract? So that is the kind of change which has happened, we have seen it happening in front of our eyes, which we wanted to discuss.
Maybe it's a good time, Depinder, to come to another question which emerged from your paper, that most of these professional NGOs, they were called as knowledge building organizations. So what is the yardstick to assess the utility of the knowledge that is built? What kind of knowledge is truly valuable and stands the test of time? I mean, you have mentioned about something that you call as deflected action in your paper. Maybe you can say something about that.
Yes, I think from a very practical standpoint, every sector has its limitations. If you're in academia, you're teaching, and in that teaching, you try to bring in the contemporary perspective, the historical perspective. And in the NGO work, the knowledge, the core of NGO, the niche role of NGOs was the thought leadership. And what is it that you're contributing to understanding the core issues? For example, in forestry, there was no forest, there was no environment ministry. Forestry was under the agriculture ministry till the late 70s. And, in name of a forest report, trees were counted. How many deciduous trees, how many this age mature trees, that was the environment report. So when CSC came up with the State of Citizens Environment Report, it actually linked environment with livelihoods. It linked it with natural resources, and it wasn't just about counting trees. So that kind of a thought leadership, and then there was a book we had used to read in our library. It was Professor Piers Blakey's book of political economy of soil erosion in developing countries. That book opened our eyes to the fact that you need to look at soil erosion from a political economy perspective and not just as a technical perspective of what is the volume of soil erosion happening, what measures will arrest soil erosion, but to understand what P.S. Blakey showed was that despite the good analysis, good reports, nothing happened on the ground. So P.S. Blakey called this deflected action. All the research work, the good analytics work, which we do, ends up as deflected action. It doesn't lead to any change, but it is required. So P.S. Blakey didn't say that therefore stop this, do something else. No, he said, but we need to still continue it, but need to understand what it is. And I think that brings in this issue, what you're saying, Rajesh, of what is the kind of leadership. So leadership is at two levels. One is at the organizational level and one is within the organizations. And third is, of course, outside the organizations, to which I was alluding to, filmmakers, to academia, to activists. All of them made significant contributions. The contribution of P. Sainath in highlighting the agrarian crisis cannot be overlooked. And he pointed out that this microcredit things will fail if we continue like this. And it failed. So similarly of filmmakers, the kind of things they did on the ground to show what was working, what was not working. So I think within the organization, I also realized later in my working life, when I worked with NIUA and others, that this younger generation of professionals which is joining, they are also even within the very limited space of service delivery, even in this withdrawal of funding, there is space for young professionals to work if they get the right opportunity to do that. I am not crediting myself with any credit for providing that opportunity. All I'm saying is that the younger generation also can contribute, but their opportunities are getting less and less. So leadership at all levels is important to discuss. I will end here. We can discuss it once we also share some points.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the biggest freedom we had in those days was that you could give your own tour program. That I want to visit these 3 states and I want to visit these 6 NGOs. Fine, it's approved. You go ahead. So you are able to travel, you're able to interact, you're able to meet NGO leaders, able to meet communities, you're able to see things with your own eyes and then come back, reflect and present. That basic opportunity is no longer there in most of the jobs that are on offer now. When you are now slotted into a task almost from day one and you know nothing apart from that particular task. And that is actually sapping the energy of many young people who are getting into what we can still call as development work. So in that way, times have changed. But then if that's the reality, we have to adapt to it. And we have to see how we are a cog in a wheel, but then how do we become a thinking cog? How do we comprehend the larger whole of which we are a part? I really don't
I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
sorry, Depinder. So, like NGO by the name, it's a non-governmental organization. Now, what the government has done that with the Jan Dhan accounts and direct DBT into the Labhartis accounts, they have kind of given money directly or they give food directly to the people who need to be helped by, say, the NGO. So it is a very managerial way of doing it efficiently without any translation loss, and you are given food, you are given money, and that's over. So why do you need NGOs in between? I think the whole process doesn't really understand what NGOs brought on the table and the soft skills or the ethos and the what they did actually on the ground. It kind of just thinks that money transfer is a solution for everything.
Hello? What did you say
Yes.
at the end?
I think that's just what I thought. Maybe that's how the government feels that they can replace NGOs with DVT, and that is what is working for them. They don't feel the need of NGOs.
Yeah, that's true. It's the efficiency argument taken to an extreme. You can do away with all intermediaries and reach the beneficiary directly.
Yeah.
Depinder, do you have any idea how much time we have?
I think we should conclude now. One point I also wanted to refer in terms of an enlightened NGO leadership and from my own experience. So, for example, in SPWT, I saw Lavraj Kumar as chairperson, and the way he used to conduct the board, the quarterly, there used to be team meetings in SPWT where he, as the chairman, would come, sit through 3 days of our quarterly meeting, of staff meeting, and on the third day invite us for tea at his home. And where the idea was that to check with us, the younger staff, if we had any issues or is there any issue both in the management of the organization or in our own learning, to provide a space for us to share and discuss. And he used to sit also, he used to sit for the last day, but he used to not intervene during the office meeting, but in the evening, that. So that kind of enlightened leadership, also people like Arvind Khare, I think, who never took an offense, and the leadership of the organization was enlightened at that stage to differentiate the personal from the official. And, as Rajesh was also saying, a free opportunity to travel, meet, discuss, present. That was the kind of culture which was there. And also beyond that, if you see people like Ramaswamy Iyer, who evolved after their full-time work in the government, but could also associate themselves with struggles like Narmada Bachao Andolan, who could take up the water law and contribute to that thing. So that kind of enlightened leadership, I think, is very valuable, and which we don't see much now. So I just wanted to highlight that.
There's a question from Chidambaram. Can professional management be infused into FPOs to change the ground for farmers and rural masses? Now, I don't have an answer to that, but Chidambaram, if you could perhaps explain your question a little more, where the question is coming from, what the context is, that would be useful for everybody.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking because professional management is required for any NGOs to grow. So the farmers producers organization is one type of thought that has come into now, because earlier Dr. Korean used to say that cooperative is the best one. But now that is the best of best is also coming too. So farmers are going to own the organization. Actually, this Amul type of cooperatives are farmers-owned cooperatives. That's what Dr. Korean used to say. But now they are, due to politicalization of cooperatives, they are slowly going off the ground. So farmers' organizations are coming into being. But if professional management, like as you said in your talks, so it can change the face of the farmers' field, and there'll be a very good beginning for the farmers to come above the ground level. This is what my feeling is. What is your feeling? What?
Yes, certainly.
Could I kind of add on to that, Depinder? So in a sense, what we have to see is that.
Manu, can I suggest, your voice is breaking. I think your network is weak. Perhaps if you switch off your video, your audio may
also have professional management and
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
So
you can hear. You can. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
Please take off. Yeah, please. No, not
Yes,
hearing.
Manu, we are waiting for you.
Waiting for you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we do hear you.
Clearly.
Please.
I'm sorry. Am I audible now?
Yes,
Yeah.
very much.
Please.
I am not able to hear you. Please carry on.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Chidambaram, I don't have a
Okay.
clear answer because I don't know enough about the whole FPO sector.
Uh,
In terms of professional leadership,
mm,
where is the funding going to come from for salaried
Mm.
professionals to be sitting in FPOs?
Mm.
What is the kind of plan that the government has to develop FPOs into something, into a professional sector? It depends on
Mm.
those things. Maybe if you could shed a little light on that. How is
Yeah.
it happening now?
I'm back.
I will-
Yeah, Rajesh. So yes, so Chidambaram, basically,
Yeah.
if we go back to the history of the
Mm.
FPOs and how they were initiated by Amrita Bain when she became the chairman of LDDB. So, in a sense, it is the new liberal answer to cooperatives. Cooperatives in itself never had any dearth of professional management. Federation has the best professional management that you get across the dairy sector, even better than the private dairy sector, right? So, having professional management is not an issue in cooperatives. The whole model of FPOs was gotten to put 50% ownership in the hands of a private entity and the rest 50% or 49% in the hands of the farmers. In a sense, FPOs were a backdoor, privatization technique of cooperatives. And which is why Dr. Kurian opposed that. He felt that 100% ownership of cooperatives should be with the farmers only. And so that is the whole debate in the dairy cooperative sector, and it is all privatization versus ownership of all the farmers. So FPOs have been promoted a lot since 2014, but there are no FPOs to write home about which have done any work which is there, as in, which is in the sphere of what say Amul has done or the dairy cooperatives have done. And even prior to this, the National Dairy Development Board, I think when Amrita Patel was there, they started FPOs in Gujarat, like Mahi in Rajasthan, Bias, and in UP, forgetting the name. These FPOs primarily have been milk collecting agencies for mother dairy. They sell their milk to mother dairy, which further sells it to Delhi. Even they are not, big brands on their own in the markets that they are catering to. I think that is what my understanding is. I may be wrong. So, first of all, I think FPOs is not really something great and they've landed from heaven and they will solve the problems of development. I think we should really be clear about that. It is just a model of cooperatives in which the majority stake is with one private individual. And it was what the people of the cooperative sector believe. It was supposed to be a backdoor entry for the private sector into the cooperative. And that is what the whole fight between Dr. Kurian and Dr. Amrita Patel was about. Anyways, so that's about it. I thought I'll just add on to it.
I have okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Quick point. Actually, I agree with you certain points, but regarding this FUOs, the only point is here. By cooperatives, by some government ordinance, they can take over. In Tamil Nadu, I am talking about the case of Tamil Nadu, where there are hundreds and thousands of cooperatives with one ordinance. They take over the management of the cooperatives, and then they appoint special officers, and then they go on managing the cooperatives funds and everything for over 2, 3, 4 years, and then the elections are held, and then another 2 months or 3 months or 1 year, again they just dissolve it and then again bring it. This is what is the case here. So politically they wanted to use the cooperatives to advance their political agenda. So this is why corporate means I'm saying that this farmers organizations, they cannot be taken over by the government. Actually, this is a private organization. As you told, it's a private organization, so anybody can invest. So investment and then taking profits from there to look at the business and all these things. It is there here. But whereas in the cooperatives, there is social service-oriented organizations. So when they are not, it's not that they are not going to engage the professional, but professional management is very, very less when compared to the farmers producers organizations. And the farmers producers organizations are supported by the World Bank, and also fundings are being flown by the World Bank and also by the state governments for this farmers producers organizations, some of the farmers producers organizations. So only if there is a professional management infused into that particular type of things, it is possible that it will be better than the cooperative management style. That is what my contention is, to bring development to the farmers level is what.
Sir, my only intention is to say that cooperatives
I-
have no dearth of professional management. It is a myth.
I'm not talking about breadth of professionals get disengaged. The problem is because
let me
political.
intervene, please.
Yeah.
Please. In the interest of time.
Okay.
Good points have been made on both sides.
Thank you.
That's fine. That's fine. We can continue the conversation.
I think Aviral had a question. He had raised his hand.
Aviral Mishra had a question. If you can go ahead with your question, Aviral.
And also we to invite Vivekanandan. He is also there on the chat. If he would also like to say something after Aviral.
Yes.
Evening,
Yes,
sir.
Aviral, go ahead.
I'm actually in the current batch of PRM 44, and I just wanted to ask that.
A little louder, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you make it a little louder? The volume is very low.
Okay. Sir, I just wanted to ask, I'm in the current batch of PRM 44, and I wanted to ask, suppose people like us going into the current professional NGO sector, do you think we would be making a meaningful impact, or would it be just being the arms of some political agenda?
Rajesh, would you?
Tough question. I think a lot depends on what you do in wherever you are placed. The pressure will always be to make you a cog in a wheel in somebody else's agenda, but you will have to assert yourself, find your own truth. And that way, I think any place is as good as any other place. If you go to a corporate also, you will find similar pressures acting on you. I think an NGO is as good a place as any to start your career in. I think you should go ahead with confidence in yourself and keeping your eyes and ears open and keep learning. It'll stand you in good stead. I know it's very generalized, but that's the most I can say.
No, I get
Yes.
it, sir.
Yeah.
If I could ask, is it being a cog in a wheel promoting a wrong thing, or is it still making an impact? Is what I meant to ask.
See, it's a matter of judgment again.
Okay.
How much do you get used and how much can you push back and change things? That you will have to judge for yourself. If you feel that your energies, your labor is just being used to serve a purpose which you simply do not agree with, it's time to get out.
Right.
If you still think that you can bring some sense into what is happening around you and you're learning something, continue. Stay invested.
Understood.
And we should
Thank
choose the NGO that you join. We should correctly choose the NGO in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Depinder, you were saying Vivekanandan?
Yeah, if we can bring in Vivekanandan on the, I mean, this last point is very right, actually. I think it's very important what Aviral raised. But Vivekanandan, you're from the earliest batches like Matthew. So what is your take? We would like to conclude at this stage on the, challenges which NGOs face and, where are we headed for? If you could also speak.
He has messaged that he'll be back through his laptop. I think if we broaden the question, we started by describing the crossroads at which NGOs stand today. So in these vastly changed circumstances of today from the earlier professional NGOs, what do we see as the way forward? There is no definitive answer, but we can start trying to answer that question. It would be good to conclude with some tentative answers, some thoughts that come to us. I mean, for me personally, I've had to do a lot of unlearning because I worked in the monitoring and evaluation sphere for a long time. So thinking through log frames and theories of change and indicators, this had become kind of second nature. Now I have forced myself to try and shed that because all over there are so many small setups, individual activists, small organizations, sangatans, which are trying to do things in which these things do not play a role at all. There is no projectization. They want to achieve certain things. They want to achieve certain things to improve their livelihoods or to get, what we can broadly say as some kind of autonomy, self-rule. And for that, they are politically engaging with whatever they see around them. There is a certain logic in the way they move. Trying to understand and to appreciate that and unlearning what I have learned earlier. This is taking a lot of time. So all these emphasis on efficiency and overemphasis on efficiency is something which needs to be unlearned. That's what I've been trying. Yeah, I think Vivekanandan is here. Would you like to speak, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Depinder, good to see you after many years. I actually missed most of your speech. I just saw the link short while back and then got on. But I can still say a few words about the NGO sector because I still continue to be part of it in some way or the other. As well as these, so-called cooperatives or produce organizations. These are all very much something that I'm still involved in. But I am at the moment not very convinced that I have the kind of overview of the sector as a whole that I used to have some time back. So in some ways, it could reflect that I am kind of probably out of touch, or it just could mean there's so much fragmentation and, the networking and the common things, the solidarity, all, sort of have declined quite a bit. Or probably there's just too many, kind of organizations and too many types of organizations and so many different kinds of situations that one is not able to come to grips with the larger sector. I think maybe in some ways there is a kind of greater diversity, but not necessarily always in a very positive sense. So with that little bit, I can share a few thoughts. My own personal experiences on the NGO sector is, I think we had our peak was certainly in the 80s and 90s. I think the 21st century, the changes at the global level and national level have completely dramatically altered the whole scenario. The market for professionals have dramatically changed. So that also makes, at one level, at least 15 years back, or even 10 years back, my position was the need for professionals is much stronger now, because in many ways there is a lot that can be done. But on the other hand, the pricing of the professionals, the market, is taking them away from us. So it is a kind of a situation where there's a lot that can be done, there's great opportunities, but on the other hand, the market for professionals has changed in a dramatic way, that it's not easy to expect them to continue to work with the kind of organizations they would have done in the last century, so to say. So that is one kind of a thing. And of course, the whole global funding scenario has changed so much that it affects the NGOs. NGOs like Depinder was in Oxfam when I met him. And of course, it had changed even from the time I was first in touch with Oxfam in 82, because my first salary came from Oxfam Bangalore. And so we know these organizations, we know the people, we know the thing, but all those things so much. In the late 90s, so many changes took place that by the early 2000s, most NGOs, who are some of the best donors for Indian NGOs, especially Western Europe. That market, that thing completely shrunk, and they lost their back donors. And they lost their easy money that they had from European Union and their own national governments. And I was fortunately on the board of one Dutch NGO, and my job as part of the board was to help it transition from being a donor NGO to some kind of a executive NGO, which executes jobs globally and takes a fee and so on. So the whole scenario changed dramatically. So that is one big thing. Then the whole coming up of the CSR in India. Just, I suppose there's more than enough money in the CSR kitty at the moment for all the NGOs. But the access to it and the terms on which it is done and the whole relationship with the companies are so difficult, and it is not often done in the spirit in which we are working. It's completely antithetical to the spirit of our work, that we have to quantify everything and do something, everything. It's, of course, there is always a gray line or a thin line between accountability and, quality on the one hand, and on the other hand, having the freedom to do things. So I think we are getting now into a subordinate relationship with the companies, and we are more like subcontractors. So the micromanagement of the projects were almost weekly, fortnightly, and definitely monthly monitoring of accounts and I think, etc., mean that you have no breathing space. So the whole situation has changed, that it is only those who have the wherewithal to manage this are able to survive, and that in turn is helping to recast the NGO sector, especially those who can survive because they need to have the kind of scale to deal with these donors, corporate donors. They are also transforming themselves in an image of the corporate sector. So corporatization of the NGOs is taking place, but it's not only, you get into those corporate kind of NGOs and the culture, etc. It's very difficult. They are also there on a kind of a tiger, they cannot dismount. They're kind of running. So I'm sure there are gaps, and there are still some nice donors. There are still some NGOs who are able to do a little bit old-fashioned work, or some new work in a much more creative way. Whatever. So all that is still there. I'm not sure everything has disappeared, but it's becoming extremely difficult, and one is completely getting pushed into a very narrow kind of way of looking at things. So this is the broad thing that I'm finding. And definitely the professionals, I mean, it's become a very difficult thing. IRMAn, for instance, I think one comparison is, where are we vis-a-vis IIMs in terms of salary? And on the other hand, what is being asked for, or what they expect, is still far beyond the capacity of any NGO to pay, or a people's organization, producer company or cooperatives to pay. Unless there is a solid backing like Operation Flood, and those kind of things have disappeared. Those kind of independent programs funding, which is not tied to government. Korean was the master of getting a civil society organization stamped as a government organization, and using the camouflage of government to run a civil society program. This is something that was never openly talked about. So nothing like that exists. So I think we have, it is tough case, and there's a lot of possibilities, but one really has to work. And the problem is, nobody in the NGO chain, because now everything is talking of value chain. So if you use that kind of a terminology, is actively pushing back against the system. Say, no, this is what we want to be. While we accept some of the things you say, but we are not ready to say we will not cross certain lines. We want this. Accountants are forced. So many of these NGOs, donor organizations are, even the tsunami, we saw that. That was the first taste I had. That most of the donors are eventually eventually pushed by accountants and auditors. So that is where, and there is virtually no, maybe a half a dozen here and there, or maybe they are not even there that much. Auditors who can say this is what is essential from the point of view of accountability. More than that is not needed. No auditor is ready to tell us. He tells you, he asks you to crawl when you're asked to stoop. Same thing that happens now in the media under the current regime. Similar situation where nobody wants to take the step. This is perfectly okay. There is nothing wrong in doing this. So so the accountability to the people is gone. Completely an upward accountability. And finally at the top are auditors and accountants who completely go by the written word. Even the written word Bible and Quran, you have so many texts coming out of it with different worldviews. But this becomes so restrictive. It's so restrictive that you can't work anything. You can't spend the donor money for any other project, but no donor will give you a money in time. So how are you managing your fund flow? So these kind of very basic existence issues, and regulations and restrictions have become obviously just meaningless. You can't, if you don't spend the money by March 31st, the money goes back somewhere. That sort of a thing, nobody can work. Then who is giving you the money on April 1st? There's nobody to give you the money on April. So I think they are just, somewhere the NGO sector will have to get together to decide this is what we want. And at the moment, all those kind of people getting together and conceiving of independent policies, pressurizing, all this has at the moment gone. Possibly because in the current regime that is almost impossible. So I think the Vanis and others who did a fair amount of good job till about 2000 or even a little later, till 2010, don't have any say now. So our voice is completely lost, and we are just kind of going with the flow or just getting pulled in all directions. The producer company thing, I'll just have to say a few words because I think there is a certain level of misunderstanding about producer companies. The producer companies act what it is still the same. There's not much change in it. It is what NDDB and others lobbied for and got. So let's not think that this is something come through and it's neoliberal and therefore whatever, all those other things that we have said. It is what was asked for. But the problem is cooperatives. First of all, we must not even say that the producer company is not a cooperative. Dr. Kurian said we have cooperative company in New Zealand and other countries. So instead of registrar of societies, which is state level registrar, who calls the shots and state governments keep deciding according to their whims and fancies, let us have a central act. And the convenient thing was found was a chapter in the company law. That position still remains. So many of us, I definitely worked for many years in a sector with still possibility of registering a local cooperative is almost impossible because of area of operation. And the governmentalization of the entire cooperative sector that you have no space there. And we were managing under the society side, charitable society side. So the Producer Company Act remains still the only one where no questions asked. The ROC has to register you. So the freedom of association is very much applicable to the producer company. But then who organizes the cooperatives? What is their vision? How they organize it, the producer company? That varies. How the NDDB itself, because some of the examples given are related to NDDB. How the NDDB itself is working on a very different model of a cooperative where there is less now belief in the genuine democracy. Grassroots level democracy is not now considered a great thing. How to run it as a business? How to run a good business with the least interference from members who are becoming a nuisance, or the kind of leadership, politicized leadership that is emerging from a large cooperative organization. How to manage that? How to avoid all the complications of that? So they have narrowed down quite a bit. That is one style. We can still run, you can still run a different type of producer company, nothing prevents you. But the problem of producer company is in some ways not very different from the cooperative. You need a good model. You must have the grassroots level capacity to organize. You need funds. Now, all that is still a problem. You still don't have good promoting organizations like even those days. Only we still don't have good models. Only for milk we know what to do. We still are searching for good models for all other sectors. And then where is the resource? The problem with the producer company, rather than the neoliberal character as was alleged, it is actually a takeoff not from the regular cooperatives, but from the Andhra, the mutually Max Act. It was extremely puritanical act created by our very good friends Shashi Rajagopal and Ram Reddy. Not even one paise can be invested by non-members. So that means where is the resource going to come from? Share capital problem is a severe problem. So some kind of grants are being routed through very complicated ways they are routed to. The government of India has still not really understood this whole thing. NABARD, all those people are talking different language almost as if the producer company is some kind of new animal. It is not. It's just a different law under which cooperatives are being registered, and therefore there will be some variations. But the fundamental vision and the idea and the mission has not changed. But they are totally confused. Now they are trying to control that and coming up with guidelines which make you follow certain things if you want some grants from them. So the government is also totally lost after the farmers' struggle, because they know that the failure of the cooperatives is something that is a part of the big puzzle, jigsaw puzzle for farm reform. And they don't have a grip on it. And they have now latched onto the producer company model as that. But I don't think it is really going to succeed, because it's not just and it's a government thing as well. So the government thing, my batchmate Suresh Balakrishnan, I don't know whether some of you know him, he's worked in the UN for long, he's now retired in Canada. When he was working in Kerala and we were meeting together, he used to call getting into sort of close relationship to the government is like the Dhritarashtra's embrace. So the many are kind of trying to do that. It's going to be very difficult. And if you read Dr. Kurian's biography, though he's not been a person who talks much ideology beyond the cooperative and ownership of farmers, etc., very limited kind of a thing, one can broadly position himself as somebody who sees that we need to have something in between state and market. Something in between. It's not completely a slave to the market, nor is it a slave to the government. It should be somewhere in between. That is where he is trying to position. So I think that is still a problem. State is one actor trying to get into the cooperatives and the producer companies, whichever form you create, because they don't have answers to the rural problem. All they have is a neoliberal ideology which can support the companies and corporate sector. So right from the Manmohan era, the idea is to sugarcoat the problems of the poor and, with a human face, whatever, so that having a mask to meet the poor people with a certain amount of perhaps sincerity at some stage. I won't say it's completely, something, what do you call, with bad motives or something, but there is no answer there. They don't have a solution. So I think we still have the national level broader economic problems and we don't have too much discussions on that. NGOs are completely almost caught in the neoliberal, way of looking at things, etc., that it is very difficult to now work on some of this. Okay, sorry, it took a lot of your Thanks for the opportunity.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
That was
Vivekanand.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Manu, I think in the interest of time, I will have to wind up now. I've already got a message saying that we are way over time.
I just want to ask a small question. Do all the professional NGOs, do you have an association or a federation sort of a thing, a national level organization? Like Vivekananda ji was saying, we should push back and ask the government. So do you have such a body which can push back and talk to the government? And if it is not there, I think that should be the first agenda.
We have to push back with the corporates also. So that's
Yeah. As far as I know, Manu, the old associations are no longer as functional or as strong. And the whole sector is fragmented. Everybody is trying to protect their own interests and trying to survive. So solidarity has to come back. This has been the whole game plan from the beginning. Erosion of solidarity has been the game plan. It has succeeded to a great extent. It needs to come back. And people have to get organized and to work with each other. No blueprints that we have so far, but that's the way to go. I won't even try to summarize the very meandering discussion that we have had today. It's been a rich discussion and it needs to be continued. That's all I can say. The sector is truly at a crossroads. It cannot continue in the way that it continued in the 80s and 90s, where you are depending on external funding and you can work miracles because the government is having your back in some way. Now it is a very hostile environment and you need to learn to depend on funds which I feel, which come from the people. So this crowdsourcing or public funding is something that is required. But then if you want to work in remote geographies, you want to work politically, you want to work with the poor, you want to raise your voice against aggressiveness of state or corporates, then it's only a certain type of public who will support you. And you need to cultivate that constituency. That's a big challenge, and we don't have any ready answers to all that. I think it's best that we conclude at this stage. Depinder, last remarks for you.
No. Thanks a lot. I think we wanted everybody to engage in this, and we achieved this. And the future is difficult, certainly, and I don't need to say anything on that more than what has already been said. There are a lot of grassroots organizations out there which are struggling, and they are working well. I think the professional, again, coming back to this, professional NGOs need to see how much they can align with them. One is, as Manu is saying, how much we can align amongst ourselves, but also at that level, see from the work which I am also doing, unless you are actually engaged even in the environment sector with some primary studies, some primary research, you are actually just talking at a very meta level, and that is not helping most of us. So I think at different levels, for people like Aviral who are graduating from IRMA, their challenges are, where do we work? What environment will be best for us? To people like us who are at a retirement position, to think in terms of what we should do in future. I think everybody is facing the same dilemma, and we should be engaging more, we should be talking more, we should be writing more. I think let's do that and work together. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all. It's been a very rich discussion. Thanks a lot and good night.
Thank you so much. And we will post the recording in all alumni groups.
Thank you, Ritu.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ritu.
Thanks. Bye-bye.